The SMC Journal podcast is on the air, and that's what you're watching. I'm Scott Moore, your host, and this is the podcast where it's all about performance engineering in IT today. Today's show is about the Magic Quadrant released by Gartner for APM and observability solutions. Now, I'm really excited about this. We record these shows a little bit ahead of time, and at the time of this recording, this Magic Quadrant had just been released. And when I saw it, the first thing I did was just post the graphic of the Magic Quadrant on LinkedIn with one word: thoughts, question mark. I knew my perf peeps, you folks watching the show who get into this, I knew you would give me your feedback on that. And it didn't take long. It just kind of blew up. Like 2 days later, we've got 10,000 views on the post, and there's like 25, 26 comments from some people who work from some of the vendors that are listed on the Magic Quadrant, some of the leaders, as well as people that are great at analyzing what this quadrant really means, how accurate is it. Now I'm actually going to give you my thoughts. So I appreciate all the feedback that I got from that. Now you get to hear my thoughts a little bit after the fact, maybe a couple of weeks after. I along with some others, I'm a little bit skeptical about Gartner and Forrester and some of the other analysts that handle performance, because I've been around this thing long enough to know that performance is a very niche skill set. And whether you're talking about observability, new observability products, or whether you're talking about tried and true load testing products, Gartner has a tendency to put all load testing vendors and the automation around that into a big pile of stuff with QA testing and test automation for functionality. And I think that's a mistake. I think it may just be because they can't find an analyst who understands performance or who has that context and that background. So folks like myself, James Pulley and others, we become those voices in that void. I'm happy to be that person if I can help. But it leads me to be a little bit skeptical and ask the question, does Gartner really understand performance? Do they understand this game? Yes, they may understand the companies and the stock and what they're trying to do in their bigger vision, but do they understand if they're actually meeting the needs of the clients? And is their solution, why should it be in that upper right corner, I guess? So there are people who agree that it's very accurate, and there's some people who vehemently disagree. I'm just going to make some observations on the show, and I know we're not going to get to all the stuff that I wanted to talk about. So I think I'm going to break this show up into a couple of parts just to keep it more digestible. And before we do that, let's get into our wonderful sponsors today that make this show possible, including my friends at Micro Focus. Performance matters to Micro Focus. They make LoadRunner Professional, Enterprise Cloud, and Developer, and they have the largest number of largest community of practitioners in the world. You can check that out at community.microfocus.com. I would recommend you take a look at the LoadRunner family page around performance engineering. Scan that QR code, it'll take you right there. And also they've got some great videos on YouTube that discuss LoadRunner and performance engineering as well. Make sure you check out microfocus.com. I'm happy to announce a brand new sponsor to the show today, and that is Performance Lab. Performance Lab is a provider of premier load testing and performance testing services for enterprises in all industries. They focus on a robust methodology that they've created. They also understand the tools, and they have experienced engineers that can handle any tool that you're dealing with. They have been around since 2008 and have built a reputation for reliability around the world. They even have their own performance testing platform called BoomQ that you can take a look at if you go to their website. But they do consult around all of the major industry standard tools like JMeter, LoadRunner, and others. Have a lot of experience with Grafana. I'm sure they're working with K6 and others. Check them out at performancelab.us.com. And thanks, Performance Lab, for joining the list of sponsors to the SMC Journal podcast. That's great. I also want to say a big shout out to my friends at Folk Consulting, Ryan Folk and Scott Highsmith, and the folks out there who are highly qualified consultants who I've known for decades, not just years. They know application performance. They know how to monitor your system's performance. Anything around application delivery, your analytics, application performance testing, monitoring, or management. Doing a cloud migration, need to test from the cloud to the cloud. Folk has you covered. So thank you, Folk Consulting, for sponsoring this episode. And the last thing that I want to say here is, you know, I'm holding in my hand the 503 blend from Haymaker Coffee Company. This is my blend of coffee, believe it or not. It's the Performance Tour Edition. As I travel around for the Performance Tour, some lucky people are going to be given some bags of these. These 6-ounce bags of espresso coffee, and this was handpicked by me. This is the one I wanted to represent me because it'll get you down the road if you're a road dog like me. You want to check this out. These 6-ounce bags are for sale on Haymaker Coffee Company's website. You can buy it from me if you want to, but now we have all 3 blends back here. We have the regular and the stronger blend and the espresso blend, which is mine, which is absolutely wonderful. And not to say last but least, but Bright Payment Solutions providing the hat today. They are, I'm grateful for their sponsorship, so I'm showing that off, but they're protecting me from a bad hair day. So how about that? Great. Let's get back into the show by talking about this Magic Quadrant. And probably the first thing we should do is show the Magic Quadrant. So let's take a look at that right now. If we blow this up here where you can see it, I want to focus right now on this upper right-hand corner because that's where everybody wants to be. That's the leaders quadrant there. So I can't talk about everybody today, but I think I'm going to do multiple shows. But let's talk about 3 today. I am going to talk about New Relic, I'm going to talk about Splunk, and I'm going to talk about Dynatrace. I think those are the 3 I want to talk about today. If I look here just overall, the ones that I find are a little bit surprising, I'm surprising that New Relic isn't a little bit higher because it's the one that I most commonly come into contact with that companies already have. Even more so over Datadog. I am also surprised about Honeycomb. I'm not sure that I agree that Honeycomb is in that leaders list yet. I think they're close. I don't think that's very far off, but I'm probably ranking them a little bit lower and closer to the center just because of their newness, and I never see them out in the field. I never see them being used anywhere. I do think they have some very highly qualified engineers there, and I love their articles where they explain how they do things and how they share this information and this knowledge. And it's a bigger picture with them, I understand. But that was the one I was a little bit surprised. The other one, Splunk. I'm surprised that Splunk is as low on this list as they are because I am familiar with Splunk. If you watched the Performance Tour earlier this year, you noticed we had Rebecca Kleinert on, and I've had multiple people from Splunk on the Performance Tour show talking about observability, and I think maybe there's a misunderstanding of what Splunk has to offer today versus what they were just 3 years ago or 5 years ago. And then Dynatrace and Datadog doing this running thing up to the upper quadrant. That's not surprising at all. Other thing is you don't see any of the cloud providers over in the leader category. So Amazon, Microsoft, Azure, the cloud vendors that would provide you with default counters are not in that upper right. So that's I guess it's not surprising because they're just really there to be their cloud provider, not a monitoring provider. And if they start stepping on all of the other folks doing this and try to run them out. I mean, these companies run a lot of their services on these cloud providers. So I think there might be a little bit of, conflict of interest there if they get too deep into that. And then you can look through here. There is no Micro Focus here, who had Business Availability Center for a long time. Many years ago was in that top right. When they were Mercury HP. That has been now, they've been displaced, and I'm not sure that they're even part of the survey that Gartner does anymore. So that was interesting to me. So with that said, I want to take a look at a couple of other things, namely some articles that I want to review that where I get some of my information from and just kind of share that with you. And I'll start with New Relic. New Relic to me is a very interesting story. And the reason I'm talking about these 3 companies specifically is because they all had what I call, in the last 18 months, they've all had what I call the CEO shuffle, right? Where some CEO has stepped down, somebody else has stepped in, and they've done some level of reinvention, some more so than others. The first one is New Relic, and let's go to an article here from July 30th of 2020. New Relic reinvents its products to bring observability to the mainstream, considered to be a bold move, as the company who created APM says, you know what, APM is over. It's all about observability. And you know what, since this time, about 2020, nobody wants to say they're an APM vendor because they risk being called legacy at this point. So they're relaunching. They redid their licensing and how they charge people for their product. And so their chief product officer, Bill Staples, is the person who did this, quote unquote, as you can see there, a radical re-imaging. They have this free entry level tier, and now they priced per user rather than per server. So apparently this did something for them. If we move along the timeline here, here's another article where right after that, New Relic lays off 160 people. Now this is April of 2021. 7% of its workforce got laid off. The current CEO at the time was Lucerne, all right? And so they are showing signs of cracks here after they made that decision to do that, but the stock price actually was up. But when the layoffs happened, the stock price really dumped at that point. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. But let's keep going with this timeline as to the events that happen. So we got a layoff, and then it says, all change at New Relic as founder Lucerne hands over the CEO seat to the architect of the firm's new pricing strategy. Yep, you guessed it, Bill Staples, who is still currently the CEO as far as I know. So apparently that move was great for the company, and you can see how their numbers were reported here, and they had a major transition based on that CEO change. And then this article right here by a site called Simply Wall Street, despite currently being unprofitable, New Relic has delivered 241% return to shareholders over 5 years. Now that was as of December of 2021, so not quite a year ago. Now I'm doing this broadcast in the early July, late June timeframe, and you know what? Everything right now is getting hammered and has been for the last month or so. Let's take a look at that New Relic stock price. So whenever we look at January, look at where it would have come from. This is year to date, 2022. The stock price as of today, right now, is 42 bucks and change. It's down year to date, almost 60%. But look, every one of these stocks I'm going to show you today are exactly the same way. Everything's gotten hammered. Crypto is going through what they're now calling a crypto winter. Bitcoin's taking a dive. It's just haywire out there. But if you start there at January, that we were becoming out of December when these big changes were made. This was after that layoff. They were over $100 for that stock, and then I think everything in February just started kind of declining. There was a tech decline here. You'll see that if we compare that to some of these other stocks. I do want to also go from the year to date to, let's go back to 5 years. Now you can see how they had their ups and downs, and then if we look at this time frame here around that April to June time frame, this is when we had that big dip. And then after that, they name the new CEO, and then they get a big spike before everything in tech got hammered. So what I think this shows me is that they disrupted themselves. Bill Staples made the decision to disrupt themselves, and I think that was a gutsy move, and I think he got rewarded for it. I have seen a lot more articles and information on how to use New Relic than I ever have. I mean, good articles, quality articles. And I'm seeing that when people are using a product, like they will use New Relic alongside of a load testing tool to validate in that environment. They're not just looking at New Relic in production anymore. They're looking at pre-production. They're comparing information out of New Relic that some of that they can't get in their load testing vendor or their load testing tool. Maybe it's an open source tool that doesn't have certain monitors. They get those monitors out of New Relic, they put them together, and it's been very helpful for companies. I know of personally a few companies that have been gotten a lot of benefit from that. But let's keep going with these stock prices here. Let's look at Splunk. I told you I want to talk about them. Well, Splunk's, this is year to date for Splunk, so they're down 26%. They were doing very well and had a spike there around April, right before April, but they're down as well lately too, as of May. Let's look at Dynatrace. Dynatrace year to date, down 34, almost 35%. Started taking a dive about the same time that Splunk did. In fact, if we look at like the May 3rd as our time frame there, here's Splunk. Look at that, right about May. I guess this is when maybe quarterlies are coming in, information's coming in, right about that May time frame, everybody's taking a dive. So I think what you have to do is look over the long term. Here's a long-term vision of Dynatrace, and you can see they've been growing since 2019. They've got some really good results out there as well from companies, and that's why they're the leader in the stack. Here's a 5-year view of Splunk, gradual increase as well. And, Splunk, the thing about this is Splunk was not known originally as anything to do with performance. It was security people were using it. It was logging and being able to pick out things in logs and then set data points to it. And it was really big for the security world to be able to get real-time data that they hadn't been able to see at that level before, and then be able to do some automation behind it to prevent intrusions. And then, well, what else can we do with this? We can monitor performance like we do these other events, and now we've got a path to observability within Splunk, and they have really, really been sort of a leader in the open tracing, open telemetry. They've got end user monitoring, they've got real user monitor metrics, they've got everything now. Logs, metrics, traces, events, you name it. I think they call that MELT, the MELT stack, metrics, events, logs, and traces. And then Dynatrace on the other side of that is kind of like Datadog. Started out monitoring performance and then said, you know what? We can put data points around other things too, and security is what Splunk started out with. Why don't we, if Splunk's going to dive into our territory, why don't we dive into their territory? And I think that's been a winning combination. And I mean, you can keep going with this. So as they can, whatever you can find that can make great data points out, Internet of Things, for example, telemetry around anything where telemetry gives an opportunity for good visualization, you have an opportunity to increase the scope and breadth of your product line and what you're able to sell, which means you're going to sell more, which means your stock is going to go up because the shareholders are happy because you're selling more stuff, right? That's kind of the way it works. So let's get back into some of these articles here and talk about Dynatrace having their own CEO transition. Let's look at this press release from Dynatrace announcing the CEO transition on November 15th. Now, check that date out, November 15th, 2021. Dynatrace is called a software intelligence company here, not observability company. CEO and director John Van Sicklen plans to retire effective December 13th. Rick McConnell, currently president GM Security Technology Group at Akamai, is taking over. Now, if there's anybody who understands performance, especially at the edge and telemetry, it's our friends at Akamai. They've proven that, and so that's to me a natural transition there if somebody is ready to retire. But the CEO had led Dynatrace since 2008 from a $5 million startup to a modern cloud observability leader that is now approaching $1 billion in annual recurring revenue. Okay, great job. I think you deserve retirement if that's what you want to do. But here's another article on that. Rick McConnell basically taking over, and there's a podcast around this. Came out the next day, November the 16th. Rick McConnell from Akamai is going to be taking over, and McConnell had joined Akamai in 2011. During his 10-year tenure, his revenue went from $1 billion to $3.5 billion. So it seems to me that Rick McConnell was the person to take over from the company from a $1 billion point that they're trying to reach there at Dynatrace, and taking them even beyond that to the in the $3 to $5 billion space. He also served as VP at Cisco, so I do think that makes him well qualified to take over that position. Let's go back and look at that Dynatrace stock price for 1 year. This will go back to August, basically July of 2021 to the end of June. But as you can see, that stock price was at its high right there around November, mid-November. All right, so if we kind of hone in on that, that was the height. Rick has inherited a slow mountain slope, ski slope there, and they've got to do something about that. But I don't know that that's Rick's fault. I don't know that it's Dynatrace's fault. I think we're just hitting this market where everybody's being hit in tech, and it's bad. So remember, I told you to look at that date, November the 15th, and I could talk about any of these companies for an entire podcast. Dynatrace, I've had experience using Dynatrace at companies before. I've actually worked with Neoload and Dynatrace at the same time, where I'm pushing load against a system, retrieving information from Dynatrace in a pre-production environment, and getting down to granular level calls and finding performance level bottlenecks at the code level real time. I know that it works. It's proven. It's a great integration. So I don't have anything to say other than they are a leader for a reason. They've got the Kepton CI/CD tool for Kubernetes. Andy and Henrik are doing a great job. They're evangelizing all of the things that are part of there. In terms of comparing Dynatrace to like Splunk, for example, which is where we'll go to next, I don't know that there's necessarily a face for Splunk because they're so huge. Also, if you're thinking about New Relic, there are a few evangelists that they have, but there's no one face for the product. But if I think about Dynatrace, I think about Andy, and I think about Henrik. So they have that, at least that, from a performance engineering standpoint, they're seen, and they're represented as an icon there, which I think is great. But let's go back to November the 15th. There was another article out here about Splunk during the same time. I just remember reading this and thinking how funny this was. November the 15th, Doug Merritt steps down from Splunk. I'm like, what the heck, man? All these people are retiring on the same day. They give a strong preliminary fiscal 2022 third quarter results, and then they announce that Graham Smith, chair of their board of directors, has been appointed interim CEO, and Doug Merritt, who is stepping down after served president and CEO for the past 6 years, and they will have a smooth transition. Splunk has evolved from growing from 302 million in 2014 to 3 billion in the third quarter of fiscal 2022. So again, it's surprising because when you look at that Magic Quadrant, you got a $3 billion company, not in the leader category, but you have a less than $1 billion company that's in the top leader position there with Datadog. New Relic even backed off of there. So Dynatrace is actually sort of like the smaller dog taking on the bigger dogs in this, not to poke at Datadog. We'll talk about you next time. But I thought that was an interesting article that it came out on that same day. And then there was another article that came out in March 2022. They finally named a new CEO after a 3-month search. Gary Steele took over April 11th, and that was announced on their quarterly call. He replaces their Graham Smith, who was that interim CEO. But it says that November 15th departure of Doug Merritt, here's it says it's an unexpected departure, which was interesting. Hiring Steele quelled some of the speculation about the company's leadership and strategic direction that emerged since Merritt's departure, which came amid volatile financial performance for the company throughout 2021. So is that a case where the company was not performing as expected, and the CEO kind of had to take it, fall on his sword and leave. I don't know. This is probably the most interesting article around Splunk that I found back in November 2021. Now, the Register UK, you just got to take the attitude of, understand the attitude in which it was written. Just read this the way I perceive it was written. Splunk CEO jumps ship, share price slumps despite surging growth. All right, and so the statement in here that really got me was, why has Merritt left? The Register, this paper, has a theory. We think the former CEO, the document thanks the former CEO that enabled the company to be the leading platform, but Splunk has long stated it is ambitious to bust out of the IT ghetto into the wider analytics market to serve HR, marketing, and finance teams. Register, observability, performance, security, penetration, preventing billion-dollar companies from being on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. That is the IT ghetto. Come on. That is an insult to every performance engineer and every security person that has used these products. So I'm sorry, Register, but we got to give you the trumpet. That's what you get from me. I don't like the way that the tone of this article is, but it's out there. I've got links to this on the show notes. But let's go back and look at these stock prices again. And I'm going to go to a 1-year stock price on Splunk. Take a look at this. Splunk being down 34% as of right now, but you can see that between October and December, that's that November 15th timeframe, that unexpected departure took a big hit during December, January, February, and then March, very 1st of April, they announced a new CEO, and the stock went back up. Maybe the stockholders felt, better about that. But since then, again, we've tanked. I don't think that last movement there in May and June, same thing happened with Dynatrace and others in that May timeframe. Everybody got hit. So I just think that's a fallout from that. So all of that to say, if we go back to our magic quadrant here, and if we go over here to this leaders board that we were looking at before, two of those that we talked about, New Relic and Dynatrace, bigger companies, it's probably smaller companies than Splunk. Splunk being over a $3 billion company. Dynatrace I don't think they've reached $1 billion. I need to validate that. You can look it up, but I know they're a little bit smaller. It seems to me, my feedback would be that I think Splunk needs to be up there on the leaderboard. I think it needs to be somewhere above Instana and somewhere around that New Relic realm, and I think they're a big challenger. So they are in the visionaries board section of MQ, and I think they do have a bigger vision, and like this stupid Register article said, that's where they want to expand, is in HR and marketing and all that. But their first love, they can't give that up, right? And we are, as performance engineers, right in that pocket. Dynatrace, built and started and founded on performance as well as New Relic, and again, they're getting away from the APM terminology and going into observability. That's going to be a pattern that you're going to see more and more. Who is going to rise to the top there? I think you're going to see Splunk moving very quickly over the next few quarters on this, and I would say next year is probably going to be a little bit different. I like the changes that New Relic made. I think it made them a lot more popular. A lot more people are using it. But I think Datadog and Dynatrace are really that is accurate, that they are up there in that upper right corner, challenging each other. And every time I turn around, it seems like every couple of days, there's a new thing that one of the two, Datadog or Dynatrace, are doing to adding scope to their services, what they provide, how they meet the needs of their clients. So I got to give them credit for that, and it's an interesting race to watch as well. So it's really general, but I'm just trying to provide some data to you, like where I find my information and what I'm looking at when I step back and I go, when I look at this this board here and I think about why I'm surprised, and I hear what is surprising from you, from your feedback. Some of the people who were quoted on my LinkedIn posting. They were vendors who are kind of poking at other vendors, but they hadn't looked at that vendor in months or a year or whatever. They didn't know what the other vendor had to offer. And some people had to say, hey, like Splunk was one of them. You got to look at Splunk today and see what they offer in terms of observability, not what they offered 2 years ago, because it's a different Splunk. So I think they're excelling in that area. So I kind of question Gartner and their capability to truly understand performance monitoring and observability in 2022. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're doing the best they can. They're listening to smart people. And I don't have all the answers either. So I'll leave it at that. But I thought those were some interesting things that came out of those articles when you start putting all that together and then watching the stock price react to these announcements. I am not a financial trader. I can't even offer advice about that. I don't trade in any of these stocks. I don't own any of the shares in any of these stocks. So I can't tell you about that. I just know from a practitioner standpoint what I see out there in the market, what customers are telling me when I'm actually doing the work out there. So that's my viewpoint, just in case you wanted to know, in case there are people wondering if I'm trying to push one stock over another. I don't have a clue. I'm an idiot when it comes to that. I'll admit that. So we're not going to stop here. I want to talk about a couple of more companies, but I don't have time in this podcast. But I'm going to finish this up and talk about some more of these. I won't mention every single one on this board, but we'll talk about a few more in the next podcast. But I think that's where we're going to leave it today. What did you think about this? Was this at all helpful? If it wasn't, it's okay for you to tell me it wasn't. But I'd like to hear from you either way. You can always reach me at scottmoore.consulting. There's the link to my load tester Twitter profile, as well as my LinkedIn profile as well, and pretty easy to find. Would love to hear from you. You can email me at help@scottmoore.consulting. I want to thank a lot of you. Just since we started this broadcast, I mean, we've had like 500 or 600 new subscribers on our channel since we started. We're over 1,000, and I just really appreciate this. We are going to have this giveaway. My struggle now is, how do I trace a YouTube subscription to an actual winner and contact information, and how do I reach you? And if you're around the globe, I can't send you a package that's really, really heavy, because it would cost me more to ship the package to you. It would be like shipping an anvil. It'd be $4,000 to ship you, this bag of coffee. I mean, it's gotten so high. So that's it for today's show. Keep in touch with me, and I'll see you on the next podcast for this episode. This is Scott Moore saying thanks for watching, and bye-bye.